Let's talk a moment about Robin Amos, this man that came and went without many people getting to know his existence. He had a strong influence on your life. What would be perhaps the most important thing that you would want to highlight? I'm sure there were many, but what was his contribution in particular to you, to the theme of inner Christianity?
He was the person who connected the Fourth Way teachings and Orthodox Christianity. So, in a nutshell, he was that bridge. That he was the guy that did what Ouspensky at the end of his life said to do, which was search. In the Orthodox Church, Mount Athos, it was the sources were there that Gurdjieff had been pretty enigmatic about in terms of his sources. And Robin did that. Robin was considered a fellow there at a monastery on Mount Athos, and had over 60 visits to Mount Athos. And doing the research, he began in the and you know him at this earlier period in the 80s and early 90s. I met him, in year 2000, so you could fill in some of those gaps prior to. But he was the guy that connected it, and he put it all in a book called A Different Christianity, and that was the book that I studied with him. I visited England 3 times at his place near Devonshire, a place called Three Barns. Studied with him and his wife Lillian Delvorius, and was able to soak up this man that had just immersed himself in the teachings of the early church, and yet combine that with the Fourth Way teachings. So he was just an incredible man. But what were some of your experiences with Robin early on?
Yeah, well,
I mean, you knew.
Well, I encountered him through Gnosis magazine, that beloved esoteric magazine out of San Francisco that unfortunately ended, but we were both published in the same issue on Gurdjieff. And he did the very same thing for me, made that direct bridge to early Christianity, to Orthodox spirituality, and that to me was a massive revelation. I'd been studying the Holy Fathers for some years already. I believe I'd already translated the book on the Jesus Prayer by the Gottmans, but to have that total integration was indeed a revelation, because that gives us the heart of the Fourth Way, rather than the clinical, psychological, sort of secularized version. Since then, since these early 90s, we know that Gurdjieff's first mentor was a Russian Orthodox priest. I've seen in different places that at one point Gurdjieff studied to be a priest, was in seminary. And in fact, one of the anecdotes, and as you know, the internet is wild with crazy stories now, which is really strange, because when I started in the 70s, nobody anywhere heard of Gurdjieff unless you dug very deeply. And now in one click, you can find any story, which is actually not a gift to the world, because it just creates chaos. But at some point, and I believe it was in seminary, he was with the future Joseph Stalin, and pointed out to him that he was way too hungry for power. And it's very interesting that this supremely powerful man, Gurdjieff, encountered these magnetic figures like Aleister Crowley. And if you recall the anecdote there, his face-to-face with him, he turned him into mush when they met, and then he turned to Fritz Peters or whoever was with him and said, stay away from that man. That's some serious evil. But in any case, the beautiful reverence that Gurdjieff shows, and that is recorded by many of his really good biographers, comes out of that mystical Christianity, which he did not put forth because the secular West of the 20s did not want to hear about it. And we're in a very different place now. Now that Americans are discovering Orthodoxy, thanks to people like Father Seraphim Rose, and so then we come face to face with the watch of the heart, the hesychastic tradition, and it becomes very clear. So we know that Ouspensky made that comment. It's in black and white in the transcripts. Go find this tradition. I believe I've seen it from Gurdjieff himself. In any case, all of this brings us back to Robin Amos, who really opened the door in a very significant way. I mean, it was a true revelation. And yet, what he opened the door to brought Borris Mouravieff in, the famed third man who hated Gurdjieff and yet was very close to Ouspensky and helped him with In Search of the Miraculous. When I helped to translate the second volume because I was very intrigued, but what I found was a man who was interested in sort of the eclectic esoteric landscape of European esotericism as much as he was involved with the ancient tradition out of Mount Athos, and that I found that very disconcerting. And then I have to admit I kind of gave up on him when he gave a very specific number to how many eyes we have. I thought that was
987.
That's right. I thought that was very odd. Where do you stand with Mouravieff now?
Mouravieff, man, I hear what you're saying. It is some odd things in there, and these people you're connected with through eons of time that you're supposed to match up with, and there were 65 people that you were supposed to be connected with on this earth, and all these kind of things. There were some things in Gnosis, the 3 volumes there, which did give me pause. But I have to admit, I love Gnosis, and I love Mouravieff, and I've done several videos on him, and really felt like Robin introduced me to Mouravieff at a point where I had so many questions. And, the main questions that I had arose out of my experience within a spiritual awakening that I had during seminary when I met Charles Ashanin, who was a Serbian mystic. And I just had so many questions about what Paul was talking about when he said to pray without ceasing. And I knew that there was so much more that my Protestant professors at Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana, did not know and did not have any inkling about. But Charles Ashanin did know. And that his passing led me to you, led me to Robin, who led me to Mouravieff, and who has led me in depth into Ouspensky and Gurdjieff. And Mouravieff has played an important part for me because he specifically connected Scripture with the fourth way teachings, and a tremendous amount of Gnosis. The 3 volumes made and do make a lot of sense to me in terms of that esoteric teachings. And Robin was interested at the end of his life about getting back to a specific monastery on Mount Athos, because there was rumored that Mouravieff had spent time at a specific monastery, and that he wanted to go to this library and see if there were any connection there. And so Robin, up until the end of his earthly existence, was very much connected with research and connecting us with those things. And I just ate that stuff up. I just love it. And Robin's research and his ability to put all this together really are encapsulated in a different Christianity, which made as much of an impact as Moravieff's Gnosis as anything else.
Now, I suspect that Robin might have focused more sharply on ancient Orthodox teachings and moved away from the more mystical, esoteric enigmas that are less important in relation to one's actual efforts and journey of the soul.
Yeah, and that was my experience with him too. I disconnected myself with Robin about 2006 or 2007. So I don't know. I don't know toward the end of his life what he was doing, where his research was taking him. But I do know that he continued to make visits to Mount Athos up until the very end. And there's still a Praxis Research Institute group that is online, and I visited them. But Robin is the guy that stands as you do, and as Charles Ashanin does. They stand in the long tradition of passing this esoteric knowledge, passing from person to person, and that is key. Is that personal connection with someone. And that's what Charles Ashanin taught me, Robin taught me. It's that one-on-one that you have to take time with someone and nurture them and really continue to be there with them. It really reminds me of the George Lucas and the Star Wars stuff with Obi-Wan and Luke Skywalker. It's just, to me, it's just fabulous, this sense of just really taking an entire lifetime to walk alongside someone and be there with them. And that's been my experience.
As I've told you in the past, the last week of his life, Charles spoke to me about passing the torch.
Yes.
And he was so relieved that he said, I had another 40 years ahead of me, just as he knew he was about to leave us. He didn't realize it was going to be a week later, but that was his concern, was that the torch continued to be passed on. And he was satisfied that it was in process, and that's very meaningful. I think of when they republished a few years ago In Search of the Miraculous, they specifically republished it with a Sufi image, trying to distance or reject that Christian connection because of the prejudices and ignorance in the West among the New Age leader types who were part of that, who just haven't ever heard of St. Theophan the Recluse or St. Simeon the New Theologian or any of these. You really have to enter that world to see for yourself the kind of timeless teachings that are available. And that, of course, is Gurdjieff's genius, is that he made it accessible, practical, disconnected from all the complexities of the religious, cultural things. And yet at the same time, Mouravieff wanted nothing to do with him. I'm told that his aristocratic Russian background was repulsed by Gurdjieff's sort of crass Armenian, Greek, Caucasus. And
Caucasus.
The accent that he had, that interfered with it. But we also know that Ouspensky left Gurdjieff. And
he wasn't with him very long, was he? I mean, when you look at it, and boy, he really did a number on Ouspensky. I mean, in terms of the creativity that Ouspensky had with A New Model of the Universe and Tertium Organum, Ouspensky bought into Gurdjieff and really was there as his disciple, and I'm fascinated by Ouspensky. He's one of my favorites. I absolutely love his writings, but the Mouravieff connection is really, really mysterious about how those three connected.
Yeah. And then Mouravieff's efforts in Geneva just failed completely.
Yeah.
And so all of these modern roots of these ideas that are out there are veiled, so that people are coming at it without any sense of background or depth perspective, and usually just end up worshiping the messenger, the great powerful guru that Gurdjieff was, which he personally did everything he could to avoid. When he threw the people out who'd loved him and been with him all along, to force them to live on their own, to make that next sort of quantum leap beyond him.
Yeah.
And, how typical that decades later people bypass that and do exactly what he said they shouldn't do.
Yeah, within the first few pages of In Search of the Miraculous, Ouspensky writes that Gurdjieff says specifically that this is esoteric Christianity. And when I read that in Search of the Miraculous, I was like, yeah. So then, right when I'm reading that, I'm in Chicago, and I meet Bernie, and I meet Robin, and I'm reading that, and all of a sudden I get introduced to Mouravieff. It was just so exciting to have these questions that you can hardly even utter on your spiritual journey. You don't even really know why you're not satisfied with the two-dimensional teachings of Protestantism. John Wesley went so far for me. And Barton Stone, and these guys just went so far and did not have any capacity to give me any answers. And then all of a sudden, I meet Charles and I meet Robin, and these it's laid in front of me, and it was such a gift to me to be able to say, here it is, read this stuff and see what you think about it, Pete, and move ahead and find your place in the universe. And I have such wonderful memories of Robin and Charles. It's just wonderful to talk about them.
Going back to Ouspensky, as far as I can see from the best of the anecdotal material, he ended his days deeply depressed.
He did.
And sort of obsessed with this idea of eternal recurrence for some reason.
Yeah.
And his key student, Rodney Collin, who was there at his side at the end, and wrote some extraordinary books himself, The Theory of Celestial Influence. I don't know if you're familiar with that one.
Yes.
And
yes.
The Mirror of Light, extraordinary things. But he spent, I'm told, 3 days in his room, in Ouspensky's room, after he died, just locked away, completely lost. So some real human tragedy there.
Yeah.
And then we know that after Ouspensky's death, Gurdjieff receives the manuscript to In Search of the Miraculous, which we should say was originally titled Fragments of an Unknown Teaching, and it was the publisher who put the flashy title on it. He said, Gurdjieff says, "First I hate that man, now I love that man."
Yes. Yeah, fascinating. I just, the way in which Ouspensky ended his life, the way that I've read several biographies of his and just trying to glean. Colin Wilson's got a great biography of him. Just tragic with the alcoholism and just how he sunk into it. But he seems to have had some type of revitalization, it sounds like, right at the very end, and that's what I would like to believe. But that is it was a very tragic ending, and his connection and his encounter with Gurdjieff was it was life-changing for Ouspensky. It really was. It really altered his trajectory and his philosophy and his life and everything. And he was pretty empty at the end.
Yeah. And how interesting to come upon his words in the midst of a meeting, abandon the system. This, supreme intellectual and all his charts and all of that, to come to that point. I mean, that's kind of a spiritual leap for him. And yet he did not go back to that ancient tradition, which could have saved him from this existential angst that he was in. It's like the power of his intellect kept him from the heart, from that warming of the heart which the Holy Fathers insist upon as so critical. And who knows, maybe that's where Gurdjieff was trying to direct him, to lead him in that mysterious thing that he wanted him to do, that was the breaking point for Ouspensky. He gave a task to Ouspensky, who said, I cannot do that. And that broke the relationship. And then later Ouspensky says, I finally completely ceased to understand him.
Yeah.
But it may well be that the genius intellect of his stood in the way of that other aspect that might have given him the joy of the master, you know.
And that's where I finally not disconnected, but I kept searching, and you and I both have gotten into Orthodoxy to such an extent that and that's where Robin comes in. We bring Robin back here toward the end of our talk, because Robin is the one that said, you know, this whole development of a magnetic center is the key to this, and cleansing the nous. And that's when you get into Saint Seraphim, Serov, and the Cappadocian Fathers, and some of these guys that really, without knowing it, Gurdjieff and Ouspensky were kind of chasing after, but didn't really know it, because really the core of all this teaching originates, if not prior to, with Jesus and the Essenes and going back into the mystery religions. The Cappadocian Fathers in the 4th and 5th century, you get into that, and you get into Gregory of Nyssa and Nazianzus and all these guys, and that's when you really get into the core of it. And that's when I begin to recognize, St. Simeon, the new theologian, he knew something. You know, these guys knew something. There was a connection there. And combining that with meditation, I use the Jesus prayer, and that's what Robin taught me, was how to sit and use the Jesus prayer, and how to breathe and posture and everything. So combining the Jesus prayer and meditation with all this, which Ouspensky and Gurdjieff, did they know about? I don't know. But if Ouspensky had known this, and he had combined his intellect with his emotional center and purified that, I think his life would have ended in a very different way, because you have to be grounded in a way which is not just so heavily weighted on the intellectual side, which I think is Ouspensky's downfall.
Yeah. Gregory Palamas was a real focus for Robin at the end, right?
Tremendous, yes.
And I suspect there is yet to distill out of what he published and translated the instructions that were there he felt were so important. I don't know if
he was deeply connected with the translation of the triads. So that was something that he was doing when I was there in my last visit in 2006. So he was doing that and translating that, just so focused. He was just laser focused on getting that translated. And Lillian actually painted an icon that's on the front cover of that. So Lillian painted that. She was a tremendous artist in her own right, and a deeply mystical person as well. Very gentle, Lillian was.
But all of that is unapproachable for many seekers, especially in the West. You know, the language, the antiquity of it, the religious atmosphere of it, which is so foreign even for a Western Christian, that, you know, what I have found is that for most seekers, they have to go through the fourth way to reinterpret what the message was, especially through the ways Maurice Nicole shares it in the New Man and the Mark, to have their eyes open to the power that is there, that is veiled by the awful theology that is all around us, and which creates associations that shut off the real content of the material. And the journey to rediscover that, most people don't have the energy, the force, the drive to do that. But they can understand self-awareness, higher consciousness, self-observation, wrong work, negativity, you know. What they don't realize often is that that's the jumping off point for the mystical, as you speak of the purification of the emotional center. And the school that I was in, of course, never went past those particular teachings, even if it expanded into the best of human culture around it. That leap into the Holy Fathers was just too much, asking too much of secular minds, really, you know. So Robin, we owe a great debt of gratitude to Robin, and his work continues. He established these seeds that have just begun to sprout. It could be 30 years before his real work begins in this world for those who seek it. And of course, you and I are custodians of that in some way. As you know, I was given the manuscript of A Different Christianity before it was published. Imagine the privilege and the joy, and wrote a big review of it, and it was a real blessing on my life. But it wasn't meant to be for me to journey with him, simply because he went in another direction, and he had his own sort of idea from his exposure to Ouspensky type schools in England as to what a teacher should be, what the relationship should be.
Yeah.
But then we come full circle, because I only recently, through you, found out who his mentor was on Mount Athos, whom I hadn't gotten to know when I was deep in the Orthodox Church. Saint Paisius, modern saint, was the elder, the spiritual director, the spiritual guide, the spiritual father for Robin Amos. How extraordinary. So we all meet again at the center.
One of the amazing things about my experience with Charles Ashanin and with Robin Amos is that their presence in my life has become more powerful and more loving and more acute after their death. I feel their presence more after they passed away than prior to. And that to me is so hopeful and so exciting, because I really do feel their presence. And these things are, we cannot see them, and that's where Apostle Paul comes in. We can only see through a thin veil in this life, and there are other forces out there connecting us, and this is one of them. Robin continues to live on, and our work here in being custodians is vital, I think, to them on the other side.
And that's one reason we're talking on this internet toy, and we'll see what seeds that produces.